Audiobook excerpt from Potage by Dave O'Connell, read by the author. Downtown.
My adult interest in cooking had an improbable start. In 1970, I went to work for the New York Telephone Company. They gave me a bag of tools and 2 weeks of training before inflicting me on the residents and small business owners of the Lower East Side, Chinatown, the Bowery, Little Italy, a newly named SOHO, and a yet-to-be-named Tribeca. My tool pouch and test set were like the keys to the city. I was on the roofs, in the alleys, and in the basements. I wore leather high tops for protection against the rats, and carried biscuits for the dogs in the alleys and basements. Doors swung open on poker games, people sleeping in domestic shouting matches. People continued to play, sleep, and shout in incomprehensible languages, while I fixed the phone. Almost no one asked for identification or noticed that I had left. In what would become Tribeca, a few olive merchants and butter and egg men were still operating on Greenwich Street, with views of New Jersey over the rubble of what had recently been the Washington Market. Martinson roasted coffee every Tuesday morning on Franklin Street, covering several blocks in irritating smoke. Most of the streets were cobblestone. The Mercantile Exchange was operating from oak trading desks and Depression-era telephones in a 19th-century building at Harrison and Hudson without a computer in sight. Printing businesses were clustered around the entrance to the Holland Tunnel. The World Trade Center towers were rising steadily above it all. SOHO was in its infancy. The first art gallery opened on West Broadway shortly after I arrived. SOHO had been the industrial heart of Manhattan after the Civil War. 100 years later, most of the dwindling businesses were light manufacturers, electronics assemblers, needle trades, and rag pickers. Sweatshops hung flags on the cast-iron facades announcing the garments they were working on that day. Camisas, faldas, pantalones. At lunch and steam table cafeterias, seamstresses flirted with stevedores over sausage and yellow rice. Today, loft living means large, luxury space. In 1970, it was just a step above camping. As businesses failed, artists took over the large, cheap spaces that would let them paint and sculpt indoors, while remaining close to the center of the art scene just north of Houston Street in Greenwich Village. Furnishings were often just a cot and a hot plate. I did not ask about plumbing. By 6 at night, SOHO was a ghost town. When I was a boy, a trip up Bowery on the bus was made more frightening by the shadows of the elevated railway, half-concealing bums sleeping on the sidewalk. By the 70s, the L was long gone, and Chinatown was beginning to explode eastward, out of Mott, Pell, and Dwyer Streets, across Bowery and East Broadway. Scrawny, drug-addicted hookers and their pimps owned the corner of Bowery and Delancey. Puerto Rican and Dominicano gangs were carving everything from there to the East River into their own Balkans. Squeegee winos would more or less wash your windshield for a quarter while you waited for the light at Bowery and Houston. Mafia boss Joe Colombo was uptown, comically picketing FBI headquarters with his Italian-American Civil Rights League, claiming the FBI was chasing a non-existent mafia and insulting all Italian-Americans in the process. In June 1971, he was shot at his own rally in Columbus Circle. The war was on. He was still in a coma a year later when rival Crazy Joe Gallo was murdered in Umberto's Clam House and died on Broome Street. Blood and cops were all over the sidewalk when I started work. I asked one of the locals what had happened and got the standard neighborhood answer. Something happened? The bodies of lesser-known hoods started showing up in alleys and parking lots. It was Runyon land, colorful, dirty, and manageably dangerous. I loved it. I moved in on Thompson Street south of Spring Street.